Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton, Deputy Editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this Photoshop Masterclass tutorial. This time, we're delving further into the power of Photoshop's history functions, focusing on the Art History brush and showing you how to turn a regular photo into a painting. Now, the Art History brush is a pretty big departure from the regular tweaks and improvements we can make to pictures in Photoshop. And due to the effect it creates, this lovely painterly style, it's actually more of a graphic artist's tool. Don't let that put you off though, it's actually very easy to use and can have a dramatic effect on your pictures. The Art History brush works in a very similar way to the normal history brush. You simply pick a history state within the history palette, and when you click on the image, pixels from that point in time are painted in. Where it differs, however, is that it distorts those pixels, making the results look very much like real brushstrokes. Because of this distortion effect, using the Art History brush is not an exact science, and just like a real painting, you'll never get the same effect twice. Therefore, it pays to be patient and practice on the same image at least a couple of times, and this way you'll discover different treatments and be able to pick the one that pleases you most. To practice this technique on the same image as me, just open up the file called arthistory.jpg from the CD. But if you want to have a go with your own pictures, you'll want to know which kind of image works best. Well, the good news is a decent painterly effect can be applied to most types of shot, but some will certainly work better than others. Pictures like this, for instance, where we've got a fairly strong subject that we've been able to kind of paint some detail into, as well as areas that can be painted in quite a free and expressive way like the sky, well, they work pretty well because there's a nice balance between the two brush styles. Therefore, you'll find that landscape shots are a pretty good place to start your travels with the Art History brush, but don't ignore those still lifes and those portraits either, because approached in the right way, they can work just as well. Right, okay, let's get started, and we'll just close down our example picture here, and we'll open up the start image. And as I said, that's called arthistory.jpg. Now the first thing we're going to do is bring up the layers palette on screen, so come up to window and down to pick layers. I'll just drag mine in from the side here. And then we're going to add a new layer, which is going to be the canvas layer, where we're going to paint on our kind of expressive brushstrokes. So you can either click on the create a new layer icon here in the layers palette, or come up to layer, down to new and pick layer. That'll give us a little dialog box, and we're just going to call this one Canvas, and click OK. Now as you see, our canvas layer appears within the layers palette now, but before we start painting on it, we want to make sure there's some canvas to paint onto. This basically just involves filling the layer with white. So come up to Edit and down to Fill, and then under the Contents heading, next to where it says Use, just pick White. Click OK. And there our background image, our original shot is obscured, and we're ready to start painting. Now the advantage of painting into a blank layer like this is that we can see exactly where the effect is being applied, how heavily, and also from a slightly more kind of artistic point of view, we'll get a few areas that won't be touched by the brushstrokes, giving us a bit more of a sort of an impressionistic style and making our finished image look that much more like a proper painting. And at this point, it's also worth noting that you can colour your canvas sort of whatever you want, creating a ground, just like a traditional oil painting, that'll tie the whole composition together. If you want to do that, just press Ctrl and U on the keyboard, bringing up the Hue Saturation palette, and then we can click on the Colorize box at the bottom, bring that lightness down to about -10, and then very subtly we can just sort of select any kind of hue we want. If you want a sort of a more pronounced effect, just keep dropping that lightness slider, and that just kind of gives us a base to paint onto that'll show through the whole of the image. As I say, it's a traditional kind of effect used in oil painting, but here we're just going to be painting straight onto a pure white canvas. So the next step is to select the Art History brush itself. Come over to the toolbox, find the History brush icon there, just click that and hold down the mouse button, and you'll be able to choose it from the list. Now just like picking any other tool within Photoshop, once you select that, you'll get a range of functions appear up here in the options bar. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to go through all these so that you're comfortable with them before we start painting in the rest of the picture. So over here on the extreme left hand side, we've got our preset picker, which we can activate just by clicking on this downward facing arrow, and in here we can load or save tool presets just by using the flyout menu. Here I've got the art history brush presets already loaded in, but if you want to load yours, just select this item down here at the bottom of the list. Moving over to the right, we've got our brush picker, which works just like the regular brush in Photoshop really. Click the downward facing arrow, and there we can set different diameters of the brush and pick different brush tip styles from this list down below. Next to that we have the mode menu, and while this is usually best set to normal, we can also get a bit creative, setting it to darken or lighten or any of these other options down here below. That brings us along to the opacity, which again works very much like the regular brush tool. Obviously 100% is going to give us a completely opaque brush stroke, whereas we can drop it to any figure below that. And what you'll find when you're painting is that using opacities of less than 100% gives you kind of quite a nice sort of watercolor effect on your painterly pictures. Because we're going for a bit more of an oil painting style in this one though, we'll leave that set to 100. And then next to that we've got the style menu, and this controls the form that the brushstroke is going to take on the picture. So taking two of them as an example, if we set it to dab, we just get kind of a splodge of paint, but if we set it to loose curl long, we get something a little bit more expressive. And we'll see how these different brush styles can be used creatively to benefit your pictures a little bit later on. Next up is the stroke area, and by changing this we govern the amount of pixels that are actually covered by the stroke. And just to give you a little demonstration of that, we'll set our brush diameter down to about 40 pixels and then set the area to say 10 pixels. This is going to paint in quite a small area then, and there you can see it happening. But if I increase that area to say 300 pixels and paint again, it's having a much wider effect and painting more brush strokes at the same time. And these really are all things to play around with in your own pictures and see if they suit the image you're working on. Finally then we come to tolerance, and this value basically limits the area where the strokes of the art history brush will be applied. Keeping it low lets you paint unlimited strokes anywhere in the image, while you'll find that a higher tolerance limits where those strokes are applied based on the source material you're using. For this tutorial though, we're going to be keeping that down at 0, so we get brush strokes wherever we want them. Okay, so I'll just refill this area of canvas with white so we get rid of our example brush strokes there. Down to fill and pick white again as the contents. And now we're ready to start working on our example image. So the first thing we want to do is get our brush sorted out. We're going to start off painting in the sky, so we'll set up the brush accordingly. First by clicking on the downward facing arrow next to the brush picker, and we'll scroll all the way down to the bottom here. I'm going to pick one of these nice kind of scratchy looking brushes. Oil medium wet flow, that one sounds pretty good. So double click that one to select it, and then we'll increase the size of the brush to 200 pixels. And still in the options bar, make sure the mode is set to normal, the opacity 100%, the style to loose curl long, the area we'll set to 20 pixels, and the tolerance to 0. And now all we need to do is start clicking and painting onto the canvas. And there you can see, just as I'm kind of moving that brush around, the way it's applying those kind of nice broad brush strokes over the sky. Just move that layers palette down for a moment so we can see where we're painting. Now we can be pretty quick about this because the nature of the brush strokes we're using is kind of quite random, so we'll just kind of fill that in until we've got all our sky in there, and we can even paint over those parts of the house too. And as I said before, it doesn't really matter if you leave a few small areas of white in there. That'll just add to the kind of the authenticity of the painted look. Now, as mentioned earlier, you don't actually have to set a history source point within the history palette to make the art history brush work. It'll automatically default to the open state, and that works fine. But if you are having any problems for some reason, just come up to Window, down to History, and you'll see that that source point there set in the open state. It can be either of these two really, and that's the correct position for it to be in. So we can just kind of carry on there, just bringing those brush strokes in until we've got an effect that we're reasonably happy with there in the sky. That's kind of looking okay, I think. And as I say, don't worry about that house for a moment. We'll be filling in the detail on that a bit later using some different brush settings. But for now we're actually going to move on to the grass in the foreground, and we're going to change the brush a little bit there. And to do that we're going to use the brush palette. So it's back up to the window menu, down to brushes, and when that dialog box appears, just click on brush tip shape, and then using the little diagram here over on the right hand side, just rotate that until you get an angle of about 115 degrees, and then we'll just click on these buttons here and drag it into a roundness of 20%. And if you don't want to kind of click and drag that stuff, you can just fill in those numbers in these boxes here. Now with our refined brush tip shape, we can now just increase the size of the brush again, this time up to about 300 pixels. And then I'm also just going to change the style of the stroke to tight medium. And then because we've got our new brush tip shape worked out there, we can just run it along this kind of lower part of the image, just mimicking the shape of that grass there. And you might want to, as you kind of continue doing this, just bring that brush dialog box back in and just kind of vary the angle of those strokes a little bit as you do it, just kind of giving it a little bit more of a natural sort of look, a bit more as though you were painting it freehand, because after all that's the kind of effect that we're after. And then we can also just use the left and right square bracket keys on the keyboard just to increase that brush size as we kind of move closer to the viewer's eye, so to speak. So we'll just keep kind of altering that angle, just keeping things quite sort of random there and sort of increasing that size as well until we've filled up that foreground with this effect that looks a bit like sort of blowing grass. Okay, so that's our foreground sorted out. Now we're ready to start concentrating on the buildings themselves. To do this, once again, we're going to change the shape and the style of our brush. So it's back up to the brush menu, click that downward facing arrow, and we'll reselect one of these kind of rough looking brushes. In fact, we'll just go for the same one that we had before. And then we'll increase the size to kind of 40 or 50 pixels. Once again, change the style of the stroke, this time to loose medium. And then we can just start working around the edge of the building, just kind of letting the brush guide us really against the sky there, and we see it kind of begin to take shape. Just working along the horizon there as well, just using that smaller brush to give us a bit more definition. And as you can see, we're sort of painting in those details in a really nice, natural way. It's really fun to do this. In fact, you could probably spend hours just messing around with your photos in this way. So just keep kind of continuing to work that smaller brush over those parts of the building that you want to kind of capture in more detail. And we just bring it along here, further over that horizon and over the smaller kind of outbuilding there, and also over those areas slightly closer to the structures. We'll just in fact bring that brush size up a little bit, just bring that up to about 70 pixels now, just painting in around the base of the building. And all the time we're adding detail to our painted picture, just bringing the brush size down again to about 40 pixels. I'm going to paint in around this door now, kind of bringing that into view, and the window there. And all this information, of course, is being sampled from our original photo layer. So if we just click off and on the canvas layer there, you'll see what's happened to our original picture. And we're actually starting to build up quite a nice, stylish, impressionistic look. So we'll just continue to paint in around the edges there, just along the guttering, bringing that through. And I mean, already that's starting to look really nice. But of course we can take things further. If we just zoom in a little bit on our picture and we select an even smaller brush, let's take it down to about 10 pixels, we can just run that sort of over and around the window, just really bringing in a lot more clarity now over those parts of the picture that are really going to kind of attract the viewer's eye. Just doing the same over the door frame there. And as I said in the introduction, there's kind of no real sort of exact way you should be doing this. It's just really all about kind of carrying on painting and seeing what you get. Of course, we'll just kind of continue our smaller brush strokes around the outbuilding here, because that's looking sort of a bit blobby and undetailed at the moment. Just kind of bringing that into view, and just holding down the spacebar to bring up the hand tool, just to kind of scroll around a little bit. We can fill in a little bit more detail around the kind of the base of the buildings, and along the horizon there. I mean, really, we're going for quite an impressionist style here, so we don't want things to be too accurate. And in fact, the more kind of accurate your brush strokes, the more sometimes the image can just resemble a bit of a blurry photo. You want brush strokes that are big and expressive, and ones that sort of match the mood of the subject, just like we've done with the grass down here at the bottom, and the kind of the curlier strokes up there in the sky. I will just kind of work around a little bit more the edge of the building though, bringing in a little bit more detail there, and up there on the chimney stack. And really, as I say, this is really just about working away with the brush until you get something that you're happy with. That's looking kind of pretty good to me. I think we're just going to do a little bit more work down there in the grass because it's a little bit of a choppy kind of edge between those brush strokes that we've made and the more detailed areas. So we'll just bring in our brush menu again, alter that angle and the roundness, bring the brush size up, touch that over some of those areas so it looks like the grass is just kind of peeping across over the top of the foreground details. And I think that's really starting to look quite good. And it's all thanks really to the different styles and the different sizes of brushstroke that we've used. If we just use the same uniform style over the whole image, it'll look pretty bland. But because we've taken account of the different subjects within the scene and used the brushes appropriately, we've managed to put together something quite effective in a very short space of time. The last thing we're going to do is just boost the contrast in the picture a bit, and we're going to do that using a curves adjustment layer. So bring your layers palette back on screen, click on the add new adjustment layer icon, come down to curves and give that a click. And we're just going to use a pretty regular kind of S curve here, just lightening those highlights, darkening the shadows, and if I click OK and then turn the adjustment layer on and off, you'll see that we've got something a lot more punchy. And on the whole, that light and shade just gives it a bit more of a painterly feel. If you want to continue using the art history brush, just click back on the canvas layer and you can do just that. Add a few more bits of grass to the foreground there if we want. But I think that's come together quite nicely, so to finish things off, we'll just come up to layer and down to flatten image. So there you have it, a very quick and easy way to turn any photo into a painting, and it's all thanks to the art history brush. Very easy to use, highly adaptable, and guaranteed to give you some stunning images. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, give it a go with your own pictures, and I'll see you next time.